Hello and welcome to everybody joining today's webinar. Thank you very much for attending today's webinar. We will provide you with some examples and success stories how SAP customers enable their test framework and gain operational efficiency. Some housekeeping notes. The session will be recorded and the slides and the recording will be posted on our website. Since we have a large crowd on the webinar, everybody is muted. We encourage you to post your questions in the question box, and we will try to address them in the order received. We'll make sure that we have 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the webinar to answer all of your questions. My name is Heiko Hecht, and I'm happy to kick off this webinar. My colleague, Clyde Ford, will walk us through most of this webinar. I met Clyde over 10 years ago at Conagra Foods, one of our first RB Plus customers in the US. Clyde was responsible for implementing Conagra's TCOE, including SAP Solution Manager, HPALM, SAP TAO, and related tools and processes. Clyde has since then worked in different leadership capacities, and I'm very happy to have him on today's webinar. He can share his first-hand experience with us. I will kick off the webinar and elaborate on some topics related to IBIS, RB Plus, and SAP Solution Manager. I'm working in the SAP space since '97 and I've been part of the original development team of RB Plus and SAP Solution Manager. Let's take a look at the agenda. As you can see, we have a lot of content to cover. We know that there are many options to enable your test framework. We'll present some examples how our customers have achieved that. We also will talk about best practices, realizing that your specific situation might require some deviation and custom solutions. You also might have already started some initiatives. You might not use only SAP systems, or you might have some legacy tools in place also. So please contact us with any questions in this webinar or afterwards. We are always happy to help. What is reverse business engineering, or short RBE? Most of you might be familiar with reverse business engineering. We're using the X-rays as an analogy. X-rays were discovered in Würzburg, Germany, 1885. 110 years later, IBIS invented RB Plus for SAP systems and started to develop the first prototype for SAP. You're basically X-raying your SAP system to find things that are broken or not correctly aligned. We document the SAP system usage and provide details to keep it running. A few words about IBIS. Our parent organization was founded in 1994 in Würzburg, Germany, about 90 minutes away from SAP's headquarters in Walldorf. From the get-go, IBIS developed tools and methods to support SAP implementations. Professor Thomé, our founder, developed the continuous system engineering approach in 1996, and RB Plus is one of the resulting tools to support this approach. IBIS America is part of the Thomé Group, combining German engineering with American problem solving. IBIS America's focus lies on analyzing productive SAP systems for system upgrades, system consolidations, harmonizations, and simplification. These types of initiatives fit very well into SAP Solution Manager or application lifecycle management related projects, as well as into strategic assessments and testing related services. Whether you're implementing SAP HANA, upgrading to Enhancement Pack 7, implementing a few new features of SAP, you need to make sure that the new functionality works and doesn't cause any disruptions in your existing system landscape. How do we ensure the success of our SAP initiatives? with comprehensive testing. We need a business blueprint of our processes. We need to identify what needs to be tested and update the business blueprint accordingly. Now, this slide here should be pretty familiar to everyone. SAP Solution Manager supports our application lifecycle management. And to have a real single source of truth, we need to set up our solution documentation, which includes our business processes and technical aspects of our system landscape. Solution documentation, or the business blueprint, is really the starting point of your ALM strategy. You probably know that SAP has picked IBIS back in 2010 to develop the RPBD content for SAP Solution Manager. And we cover areas which are not covered by SAP in standard. In this screen, you see that we not only identify which processes are used, but also how they are used, meaning which configuration is used in the different processes, what kind of process variants are used in your system. For setting up the business blueprint, we have multiple options. I've had a session at Sapphire this year about the business blueprint options, and I also will be talking next week in Las Vegas at the Managing Your SAP Projects event about those business blueprint options. As you can see on this slide, the most detailed and process-oriented approach is supported by RB+. We define the business process hierarchy, which contains the SAP standard functionality, and then we add your rise of objects and tweak the standard structure to our needs. When we add the end user perspective and the organizational units, we have an excellent starting point to capture our business blueprint adequately. And we also have the relevant information to create or update our test scenarios and test cases. So, based on the RB+ results, we customize the business blueprint to the customer's needs, capture the testing relevant material, and establish the business blueprint or the requirements for our testing process. So with this, let me quickly change things over to Clyde. Clyde will talk about a test center of excellence and how to achieve it. Clyde, it is all yours.
Okay, thank you, Heiko. Again, I have a lot of material to present, so what we're going to start with is a case study or a problem statement from an assessment that I did a few years ago with a in the Midwest. We'll go quickly through the bullet points, really focusing on the items that I've highlighted in bold. So for this particular customer, business that doesn't know how to properly define requirements. And I kind of want you to think about yourself as we kind of go through these. How does this apply to you and your organization? Requirements are vague. They don't map to the functional or technical designs. Linkage to requirements is missing. Updates to requirements rarely occur when we make changes. Unit test cases are of little value for understanding the development of the functional performance test cases and scripts. We do happy path testing. Sign-on requirements or the design by the business rarely occurs. Regression testing by the development team is undocumented. System integrators don't do a good job. Lack of accountability and knowledge transfer from the system integrators to the customer. Change management is very challenging. There's no formal test methodology. We don't have an enterprise-wide solution. We don't operate as one team, but rather many multiple teams, disjointed. The use of tools varies from team to team. There's a lack of consistent training for the teams, just-in-time training. Lack of integration of other tools is an example. We may leverage Solution Manager, as Heiko just alluded to. There's some training tools that integrate with Quality Center that will auto-create my test cases, like UPK or UPerform as an example. Inconsistent report methods and dashboards. Lack of proper controls for changes moving in and out of the test landscape. Poor data or no data is a big challenge. Security. How do we define our security and roles, and how and when do we test those roles. The strategy on what to test. A lot of organizations that we work with, where I'm at today, as an example, it's just the shotgun approach. We test everything because we don't know what the impacts are based on applying enhancement packs or whatnot. Not taking into account the variance or the localization. I don't have time to test. I don't know how many times I've heard that, but I don't have time to test. In automation script development, we don't start it until we exit our development testing, and now we're into integration or systems and integration testing. Offshore test support can be challenging due to time differences, language, or whatever. Kind of coming into the last slide with the problem statement, test naming conventions were a problem. Test data naming conventions and associating those data sheets to the test cases to the process was challenging. The maintenance costs and time spent on current automation scripts was very high, which thus was the reason they reached out to me. For this particular customer, the cost of failure from Wave 1 to Wave 2 was significant. In Wave 1, they had 3,211 automated scripts using QTP. By the time they got to Wave 2, 2,448 of those 3,211 scripts failed. The reason for failure? Test cases not updated, not completed after code changes. The number of resources for this particular customer to update those failed scripts was 12 over a 15-day period with an estimated resource cost of $325 per hour. The cost then to update those 3,211 scripts that worked in Wave 1 to Wave 2 was approximately $468,000. Pretty significant. So one of the things I did with this customer and other customers is we said, let's talk about how we can centralize our testing. Let's take the best of breed tools and processes and put those into place so that we don't have to go through that same type of issue that they had just experienced from their Wave 1 to Wave 2. One of the things we do is we work with customers to help set up testing centers of excellence. And typically at the very top, we have somebody in the role of a director or a senior director who is managing and has authority over the testing organization. Underneath that particular role is a test manager or coordinator who is more responsible for test planning, test release management, reporting, metrics, and the assignment of resources to support the various test projects that are going on for an organization. Some of the different tool sets that may be included in a testing center of excellence are here on the right. Some of the other activities that a testing center of excellence may be responsible for or have input to are over here as well. I also have a dotted line from the TCOE to a training team, and again, the reason that you see the training team here is to take advantage of the training materials that may be produced through the UPerform tools or the UPK. Again, those tools can be leveraged to auto-create tests for me in test plan. An HP Quality Center, which takes that responsibility then off of the process teams to have to give me that type of detail in order for me to execute their test and or to do automation. Moving to the bottom as part of the TCOE, you'll see a solution manager coordinator role. Again, this resource is more functional focused, with the focus being on building out the projects for the teams to use, to assigning the templates that the teams are going to be required to complete as part of blueprint or realization activities, to running some of the capabilities in Solution Manager such as Business Process Change Analyzer, Scope and Effort Analyzer, Custom Code Management, and the such. And finally, you'll see a hard line coming up from here then to the soft line of a technical basis resource. If I have this type of structure in place in my organization, I'm well set to enable my TCOE. When we do assess and work with customers to build out a testing center of excellence, there's really 4 areas that we spend time on. And I'm not going to spend time boring you reading each of the different paragraphs. This material will be available post this webinar. The first area we look at is people. Do we have the right people in place to execute our methodology, to execute our strategy as far as the tools and align with our business partners? Do we have a workable, repeatable process? And from a technology perspective, do we have a tool set that can enable our process? And then finally, how do we overcome our data challenges? And again, probably from a testing perspective, data is probably the #1 issue that we run across pretty much with most of our customers. From a maturity model focus point, there's 2 areas that we really focus at. There's a strategic level and an operational level, with the strategic level being more the management view and the operational level being more the doer view. These are the people who are creating test plans, executing test plans, creating test cases and automated test scripts and performance test scripts, executing those and generating the reports to then review with management. From a life cycle and maturity phase of a TCOE, we really break that down into 4 unique levels. 1 is the initial, 2 is the controlled, 3 is the managed, and 4 is governed. In the initial, we're really looking to ensure basic quality and availability of the systems which supports the business processes. In the controlled, it's the establishment of a unified QA test approach. Level 3, we've now adopted that approach, and we now are able to provide value-added metrics back to our business partners and project management office through the measurement and tracking of KPIs and SLAs. And then in the level 4, which is governed, we're constantly improving, and now we're more predictable in how we're going to develop and execute our testing and the metrics that we're reporting back to our organization. Some characteristics of the initial or the level 1, there's no unified testing organization in place. This is the characteristics for level 1. Test efforts and costs are typically not planned. We're more reactive versus proactive in how we engage with the business. Few testing best practices are in place today. We don't have a dedicated or trained QA test team, and typically we don't have metrics. We're more spreadsheet happy more than anything. That's typically what we see in a maturity level for the initial phase. Characteristics for the controlled. We'll see a little bit more maturity as we move forward. We have a unified QA test approach that includes functionality, performance, and security. Our test efforts start simultaneous with the construction of the system under test. We have a budget forecasted for how many resources, the duration, the activities, the partners that we need to leverage to help us complete the types of testing we're going to do are defined. Governance and communication plan is in place. We have dedicated resource teams or test resources. We have audit compliant documentation that associate to the business processes, to the transactions that are under test. And we have some partial automation in place, along with the unified defect management solution. Characteristics for the managed. Again, we have a centralized QA test organization, centralized test management IT infrastructure that's fully integrated into the SDLC across the organization. We're now focused on risk-based testing. Automation of our application under test is now more fully developed. Test efforts start simultaneously with the analysis and design of the system under test. The test process is integrated, it's centralized, and again, KPI and SLA-based test management services are fully in place. And then process characteristics of our most mature or the governed phase. We're monitoring the QA process. We're constantly improving our process. The organization has adopted the technology, and business process change impact analysis is part of our organization. We're also more predictable on our defects, understanding that as we continue to do more testing and add more rigor to our testing, we kind of have a pretty good idea of where our breakpoints are based on historical test runs. 4 major phases of development that organizations typically undergo as they build a testing center of excellence typically include phase 0, which is manual testing. Again, I'm really focusing on those areas that I've underlined. In phase 0, there's a lack of specialized tools. We're spreadsheet happy, and testing is conducted manually. We're not really looking at automation at this point. In phase 1, which is project testing, and kind of to the bottom here, this typically identifies about 90% of the customers we work with. Companies in phase 1 treat testing efforts as independent projects. Test management tools and test automation tools may be used, but they're usually restricted or limited in functionality. And testing best practices are not established. In phase 2, or the standardized methodology, we have standards for testing and documentation, process, and technology, but their adoption throughout the organization is typically not widespread. These standards may be used separately on projects, and economies of scale through sharing resources, people, and technology across multiple projects are not fully realized. In phase 3, the centralized delivery, we have an established testing organization. Best practices, for the most part, are implemented, and automation across multiple projects and even across multiple lines of business is in place. The testing organization is widely recognized as a resource for assistance with testing on system development projects. And in phase 4, enterprise adoption, enterprise being the key word, we're no longer just focused on our SAP testing, but as an organization, this is our enterprise-wide solution. Testing organization is recognized as a center of excellence. The center of excellence plays an active role in continually improving. Some characteristics of each of the 4 phases. Again, that's phase 1, standardized methodology, 2, centralized, 3, and then enterprise adoption in 4. Some of the key things is testing services are introduced in phase 1. The team for testing has been identified. Tools are introduced. Some aspects of automation are brought to bear, and we now have a defect tracking system in place. Moving over to phase 2, some of the key things that I highlighted are testing best practices are now being introduced. Methodologies and practices are shared with development and testing resources. And we have a TCOE manager and leaders identified. Moving over into the centralized delivery, core processes of tests, a core set of test processes and tools and methodologies are defined and adopted by the organization. Testing services are provided across multiple projects. We have lessons learned. We're now developing metrics, KPIs, and SLAs so that we can get better. And we're now successfully deploying success stories and sharing that within the organization as we promote the services offered by our Testing Center of Excellence. And then in the enterprise adoption, our services and tools were institutionalized, where enterprise SDLC improvements outside the application testing, influence application quality are coordinated by the TCOE, and financial application quality metrics are gathered and communicated throughout the organization. Some of the benefits also highlighted: increased quality in phase 1, reduced system outages, reduced time to market, and reducing risks, failure, and cost through better test coverage and automation. Some of the benefits in phase 2 are time per test cycle are reduced. Savings are realized by eliminating redundant methodologies, processes, and tools. Cost is reduced. Return on investment is realized through standardization of methodologies, processes, and tools. Some benefits for phase 3: unexpected departures of key team members no longer cripples our organization. TCOE is now regarded more highly internally, creating confidence throughout the organization. Continued reduction in project costs in development, test cycle times, and then again metrics on TCOE performance are gathered. And then benefits for the enterprise adoption is improved availability of data and metrics to help pinpoint quality and performance issues, achieve continued improvement, and I finally identified defects are discovered earlier throughout our process. Some challenges of implementing a testing center of excellence for phase 1 is political acceptance. We're used to doing things the same way. Organizational change management opportunities are always going to be in place when we are looking to implement a testing center of excellence. Skills with automated tools are limited. Again, if we're using the HP solution as an example, although this applies to SAP tools, WorkSoft, it doesn't really matter. Typically, we're not requiring our current teams to be VB scripters as an example. So we're now looking to add some additional skills to those people who are going to be doing testing. Some challenges is development of early wins, and again, we're looking to find a team or a project where we can fully enable that team to be successful so that we have a champion for our organization. Testing approach driven by project teams. Testing methodology and best practices may not exist or are not well established. Some challenges for phase 2 are slow or reluctant to adapt, demonstrating value, and then knowledge acquisition by testing teams of additional systems. And in phase 3, there's a reluctance to adopt the standard methodology, resulting in some friction. And one of the things that we want to do is, instead of having friction where we're trying to drive things down people's throat, we really want to work more collaboratively with our process teams, with our operators, with those people who are responsible for developing the systems under test, so that we're more of, and they become our advocate, and we're more of a partner with them. Some of the challenges in the enterprise is enforcement of standards and best practices continues to be a challenge. TCOE must continue to demonstrate ROI and other wins to justify its existence. The term, "what have you done for me lately?" we need to continue to improve and to show the value back to the organization. Some of the roles and approach for the Testing Center of Excellence by phase. Again, in phase 1, we're test automation experts. For defect tracking, test management requirements are a part of the organization. In phase 2, we've identified that TCOE manager, and we've also identified QA test representatives. In 3, we're adding more resources, more technical resources in test engineers. We're not just manual testers. We now have people who can do performance testing. They're more integrated into how we do VB, how we can use components and customize components to do testing smarter, creating smart components as an example. And we have data engineers. Again, one of the biggest challenges in organizations today is how do we define captured data to create manual or automated tests, whether I'm in my dev or in my queue. And then finally, from the enterprise adoption, we now have some process engineers and some compliance auditors. We're adding more and more value-added resource types to our organization to ensure that the types of testing we're doing, the value we're providing back to our business partners continues to be enhanced. And then finally, the approach. In phase 1, again, I kind of alluded to it earlier, we're really looking at that pilot, to find a pilot, somebody to work with us so that we can validate and demonstrate the success of our SDLC, our resources, and our tools. We'll start with test processes that are high impact. We'll focus on projects or one project with high visibility, and then the incremental changes. Then the big thing here is sell. One of the things I'm doing at the current project I'm on now is I'm helping to create a sell deck where we can go to each of the individual work streams or core process teams and sell them, as well as we're telling them what we're doing to get them to buy into what our value is going to be back to them. And then in phase 2, it's create the initial TCOE team, which we kind of seen earlier when I put that Visio deck up. Standardized TCOE methodology, centralized resources within our team, centralized test environments and scheduling, as well as our tools. And then the approach in phase 3 is continue to advertise, advertise, advertise. Support project teams and train them on how to interact with the TCOE. Again, we are a services organization there for our teams. Continue to build project deliverable template, TCOE best practice repository. And again, start to advertise the TCOE successes. And then in the enterprise adoption is maintain the rigor, track successes and measure achievement, continue to promote and maintain high visibility based on results, provide expert services, and then create quality awareness. So this is the process. Now we're going to kind of look at defining the process based on test phase, some best practices. From the best practices, I'm going to start in my dev system where we do unit and functional unit testing. While we're still in the development phase instance, what we like to do, a lot of customers don't do it. This is probably where we identify approximately 90% of our defects if we use this. for our queue. And again, some companies that we work with do multiple mock cutovers, not only from dev to queue, but queue to pre-prod and pre-prod to prod as an example. SAP also provides for us a type of testing known as system testing. This is more technical testing based on the ASAP methodology. Then moving on to the queue environment, we do our end-to-end testing via integration testing. We bring our users in to perform user acceptance testing. Typically, between the time we're doing our SIT or integration and UAT, we also are doing some security testing and our performance tests, hopefully in a different environment. And then the other piece that applies across all of the different testing types listed here is regression. We're always doing regression of our unit. We're always doing regression of our string or scenario, our performance, our integration. Regression is not a standalone test type. It's inherent across all of the different test types. The next piece that I wanted to go to was defining the process of moving my testing from bronze to gold test cases. What's the strategy? Again, using the building blocks from the previous slide, we see that we have unit or functional unit testing. So I may have a process such as inventory management that has many unit test cases. Out of those different test cases for the different business processes, we want to define, as an example for sales orders, we may have 100 different test cases in sales orders, but for this particular team, out of those 100, 40 of those would be defined as gold. Golden meaning that they're critical whenever we have change of any type. As a minimum, these 40 for sales order, these 20 for inventory management must be executed as part of our scenario or string test. As we continue to expand out into our integration, it includes all of our processes, all of our scenarios, all of that for R3, as well as our other systems, our interfaces are now all included. So we now have a defined gold set of library for regression across the entire application area. So it's all of R3 as an example, including all of our interfaces. The tools for success, many of you have probably saw this. This is called the Circle of Life Opportunities. For us, what we like to do is we're painting out a picture, so to speak. These are a lot of the tools that come into play for a best practices perspective. Typically, we start with the RBE Plus to populate our solution manager. Again, there are other tools that can be leveraged. As an example, Solution Document Assistant here to build out our blueprint, and depending on the complexity of your system and if you're doing what type of upgrade you're doing and whatnot, that's going to kind of help us drive as to which tool selection we're going to point you towards. But once we get the content, our scenarios and processes and steps defined in Solution Manager, the thing we want to do is help you through a workshop define what those end-to-end solutions look like, your record to report, MRP to PR, your procure to pay, etc., etc. Once those are defined, we now are able to take this fully documented solution with the enabler of a Solution Manager adapter and move that tree structure that we've created, that scope, over to HP Quality Center, where we now have a one-to-one relationship of what you see in Quality Center to what you see in Solution Manager. This now allows me to do 100% requirements traceability of the scope that was approved by the team. The variants, as an example, we use the create sales order variant example. I'm not going to define 50 different variants as processes in Solution Manager. I'm going to define create sales order as a process in Solution Manager. The variants and how I test those are going to be done in Quality Center. And again, I may want to go from here, and this may be the only tool that I have is the HP ALM solution where I can do automation. However, SAP provides us with a component-based approach that's called SAP Tau that's going to allow us to go much, much faster with a lot less maintenance and overhead to do our testing. And then to populate our non-prod app systems, our dev and our queue and our train, there are tools such as TDMS, Gold Client, Epiuse. There are tools that are available to us to populate those non-production systems that we can then use for testing. There are modeling tools such as ARIS that can help us define and build out a more robust process in Solution Manager. There's monitoring tools so that we can monitor our end user execution of the processes, again, in Solution Manager, and a host of other capabilities. But this is typically a slide that we will work with you on to help you understand the value of the tools and how they all fit together. Solution Manager and HP ALM. I kind of look at this as two different slides rolled into one. Again, I'm seeing I have a blueprint which details my business processes and my documentation. I have the adapter that allows me to push that detail over into HP Quality Center where I have requirements traceability and test plan. I create my tests. Once my tests are created, I go over into Test Lab and I can execute my test. I have different tools to help me do some manual or automated testing. I create my defects here as well, which brings me back to the second piece, that once I have these tools in place, I've moved my blueprint over, I now have the ability to use Business Process Change Analyzer and Test Scope Optimization. What this allows me to do, as an example from regression, I have a transport, I'm doing weekly changes. I have my test cases over in HP Quality Center, and I've automated with SAP Tau. I now want to understand what the impacts are to that testing collateral. I can, from CHARM or through other means, I can run BPCA. It has a hook into SAP, it has a hook into Quality Center, and it has obviously the hook into Tau. I can then take that BPCA analysis in Tau. I can say, show me the changes, so to speak. From Change Analyzer, it will create a tab that will populate based on the tests that are impacted based off of the changes. I take those changes, I repair them from Tau, I update Quality Center with the new components, I parameterize those new components, I put those components back together, reconsolidate, I execute my test, and then I send my results back to my incident or my change management solution. And then again, in this picture, I have the test data tool that's helping me with my data, and I also have Load Runner or Performance Center to help me do my performance testing. And when I talk about Solution Manager, because I'm not going to make the assumption that everybody understands fully what that means. When we say business scenario, a scenario may mean demand planning, which has many business processes, with one of those processes being sales order processing, make assembly to order. And under that particular business process, we have a process step that is transactional. It doesn't have to be transactional, but in this case, it is transactional, and those transactions for create inquiry are defined here. So when we talk about the blueprint and the structure and what we're trying to move, document in Solution Manager and then move over to my testing solution, this is what we're talking about. The adapter, again, I kind of talked about it earlier. The adapter is the central piece that allows me as a test organization to move approved project scope that's been reviewed and approved from Solution Manager over to HP Quality Center. And what are the things that we can push and pull from and to Solution Manager to Quality Center? It's the blueprint. It's the structure here that you see defined in Solution Manager, then again over here in Quality Center. It's business requirements, it's functional requirements, it's test objects such as my T-codes, it's documentation. Documentation could be a requirements document, it could be a config spec, it could be a link to a business process procedure or a work instruction. It's my incidents and defects. Typically my defect is going to start in HP Quality Center. I have a status that allows me to define a defect that I've identified, that I push over to my process team. They look at it and say, this is not a configuration or a data issue. They push it over to the ABAP team who says, this is not our issue, this is an SAP issue. The entire history of my test execution, the transition from me as a tester to my process team lead to my ABAP team is now pushed over to SAP. Instead of throwing it over the fence, they have the full picture of everything that we've done, everything that we've analyzed, and they can then very quickly help us resolve our issue. So we have the incidents and the defects, and again, there's a direct integration with Service Desk from HP Quality Center. And then the different testing types and attributes, again, from Quality Center, the different types of testing, if I'm doing my unit, functional unit, my string and scenario, my integration system, all those different types of testing, and the tests that are associated to each of those phases of testing are now populated in solution or in HP Quality Center. That allows me from an audit perspective to show the types of testing we did for this particular release. And then the integration between the defect and the incident management, again on the previous slide I kind of alluded to that. We have a test execution, a defect created in HP Quality Center. We transfer that defect from Quality Center to the service desk. The incident is resolved by SAP. They transfer of the solved incident back to the organization, who then applies those changes to their test environment. We retest that fix from SAP, and we, again, it's a fully integrated, seamless solution. Validation of approved project scope and how the process works. Again, I'm really driving this home to show you the value of the tool set. Again, we start by defining our blueprint and solution manager. That adapter is very important for us to push the structure over, where we create our test requirements, we create our test scripts, we consolidate those test scripts into a defined test set, which becomes our regression test library. We assign that library of tests to a tester who executes, so that we can very quickly, with one person, hopefully, provide those test results for our end-to-end solutions back to our process teams by simply having that one assigned resource execute that test set, which contains the gold scripts for our end-to-end. This is a pretty exciting area for us that SAP has done a lot of work on lately. When I say TBOM, this may be a new term to many of you. It's Technical Bill of Materials. And what is that? It's a list of technical objects, function modules, customizing settings, etc., that are used to run a transaction or program. And why do you care about TBOMs? Good question. There are three types of TBOMs. TBOMs are going to be the things that are created as we create our test cases, and there are multiple ways to do it. For our purposes, we're going to say that we're doing it manually, although there's an automated way of doing this as well. The three types of TBOMs are static. With static, it collects all objects. The key operative word there is all, based on user-defined levels. To create these, the level of effort is low. The impact precision is low. And would I just ever recommend you to use a static TBOM? The answer is no. I don't think there's a lot of value. Semi-dynamic TBOM is another type. Again, what is a semi-dynamic TBOM? It collects objects based on UPL, which we'll talk about later, from production using batch jobs. The creation effort for semi-dynamic is low. The impact precision is medium. And would I recommend semi-dynamic TBOM development? Absolutely. Matter of fact, you can auto-create semi-dynamic TBOM if you are using Charm today. As you are doing your configuration or development, that can be made part of your auto creation process via Charm, as an example. The third and final type is dynamic TBOMs. This is more precise, collects the specific objects associated to the process step or your transaction. It's a higher level of effort to create it. The impact precision is very high, almost very specific. Would I recommend using it? Absolutely. So again, there are three types of TBOMs: static, semi-dynamic, and dynamic. Of the three, there are two that you should use. It's really an organizational decision on how we actually want to implement. So again, this is just another view of how the TBOMs, BPCA, and a new term called test scope optimization are leveraged. Again, we see SAP changes, the different types of changes. We can now analyze the impact of the change. We can plan our test. We can execute our test. And again, we're now leveraging some different tools. Again, you're seeing our trace analysis with the TBOMs, our BPCA, and our test scope optimization and test plan generation, which we'll look at here in just a minute. A guide to focus regression testing using BPCA. Again, why am I even interested in BPCA? Many of the organizations that I work with, we apply an enhancement pack from SAP. We have a major bundle that's going into production. What do we test? a lot of organizations, they test everything. We've got a large library of tests. It's a lot of manual effort, a lot of hours are spent, a lot of dollars are spent. Did we really need to do that? If you were at Sapphire or TechEd just recently, and you've talked to organizations such as Goodyear or BNSF, amongst other organizations, SAS Power if you're a utilities company, we don't have to test everything. With the development of the T-bombs and then creating the analysis file using BPCA, we can now focus on those areas of the organization of our processes that have been impacted by the changes versus testing everything because we don't know what the impacts are. So the T-bomb creation process and the leveraging BPCA now becomes a great tool in our toolbox to help eliminate unnecessary testing and really focus on a risk-based testing approach, testing only those areas of impact. A guide to focused regression testing using test scope optimization in BPCA. There are tools that SAP provides to us that you don't have to spend extra money on. BPCA, there's no extra cost. The T-bomb creation process, it's a process. There's no extra cost. Scope and effort analyzer, which we're going to look at here in a minute, there's no additional cost. Test scope optimization, no additional cost. The value of these tools that are available to us, it now allows us to show for an upgrade for a release, as an example, the manual test effort, the automation effort that it's going to take for this particular activity. Here we see the test effort for the entire project, for the impacted processes without test scope optimization, the integrated processes with test scope optimization, the test effort in hours, the number of test cases with test scope optimization broken out by scenario, process, and process step. Another view, again, we're seeing the number of test cases with test scope optimization, the manual test cases that are missing. We're doing an upgrade as an example. We don't have test cases for this particular area from EHP 5 to 7. You're going to have to create those. We see over here the new manual tests, the new automated tests, the replacement with new automated tests. It's now providing us with the number of test cases, the test case creation effort in hours, and the test execution effort in hours. It takes away the guesswork that we've been doing for years and years, unless I'm using tools like a LiveCompare or Panaya. I don't need to spend the money on the additional tools, although they're nice tools to have. Many of the same capabilities in those tools are now part of your implementation of SAP via Solution Manager. Challenges to managing testing SAP enhancement packs. And I'm going to talk kind of fast because we're kind of running out of time a little. But again, so there's no transparency. The sandbox upgrade is required in the setup effort for existing analysis tools. And again, you'll have time to go back and review this after the webinar. I'm going to kind of go through. The solution to managing testing SAP enhancement packs. Again, there's no transparency, the sandbox upgrade and the setup effort. The solution is, I talked about UPL with the semi-dynamic T-bombs. We want to enable that. We want to enable that for custom code development management cockpit as well, CDMC. We want to create the auto creation of our semi-dynamic T-bombs, especially if we're using Charm. We want automated generation of the blueprint. Again, those are things that we can do with test scope optimization, with test, and then obviously the BPCA, we can do some of the testing, more risk-based testing. So again, the solution to managing testing and SAP enhancement packs, it's really leveraging the solutions, the tools available to you in Solution Manager, and then your testing solutions such as HP, SAP Tau, and then all the goodies associated with it. Solution Manager are the solution to managing testing SAP enhancement packs with scope and effort analyzer, high level. What is it? SAP Solution Manager. I'm now going to do an upgrade from EHP 5 to EHP 7. I need to have the ability to understand what the diff is between 5 and 7 and what the impacts are. Again, with Scope and Effort Analyzer, I can now very precisely state these are the modules, these are the areas that are going to be impacted based on my implementation of EHP5 to the standard EHP7. This is the things that are going to need to be tested. Here's the amount of time it's going to take to do development, the amount of time it's going to take to do testing. All these things are now available to you through Scope and Effort Analyzer. And again, I'm going to kind of go through very quickly the slides and not really say a whole lot. I'll leave that for you to go back and review if you want a copy of this presentation. This is some of the setup steps for Scope and Effort Analyzer. Here are some of the activities. Again, this is really focused on impact to custom development and modification by the number of objects, adjustments not required, adjustments proposed, and adjustments required. Again, this is helping me from a scoping perspective. And again, this is for, I'm doing, my target is the EHP7 in this example. This was a live example. Regression testing effort for optimized test scope. Again, the effort for all of our testing is defined over here in days. The areas impacted by my upgrade from EHP5 to EHP7 are defined for me, as well as the number of objects. The testing that I'm doing, whether it's manual testing or automated testing, so full test coverage of my upgrade from 5 to 7, the areas that are impacted and what tests I have assigned to those areas impacted, the number of test cases, the number, again, this is a duplicate, the test case creation effort, and then the test execution effort in hours. And then finally, I'm going to just talk to this at a high level. The number one issue with us when we go work with customers is I don't have time to create data. When I create my automation, I'm creating automation once I get into the Q environment. Once I get into the Q environment, I need process teams to work with me and help me understand the data requirements so that I can build out my automation as a testing center of excellence. With TDMS, with GoldClimb, with EpiUse, with whatever tool that we're using, my preference is TDMS, I now have the ability to take production data to populate my non-production systems such as dev, Q, training. I can now accelerate my automation test development by starting the build out of my testing while I'm still in the dev phase and work with my process teams while they're still doing their string or scenario testing to leverage automation, to build my automation, to execute my automation. I'm no longer handcuffed by having bad data in dev or dependent on my process teams to help me get my data required to build and execute my tests once I get into my Q environment for integration UAT type testing. And again, for TDMS, very versatile tool, works across multiple technologies, or systems such as ERP, HCM, BW, CRM, SCM, SRM, ISGTS as an example. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Heiko, and we can take some questions. Heiko.
Super, excellent, terrific job, Clyde. That was a nice overview, of the different options we have. Was very interesting. So let's take a look at the questions. Let me quickly see here. Kind of tricky seeing them here in this application. Okay. Do you need your business process defined to implement BPCA? Yes, you will need the business blueprint or the solution documentation defined in Solution Manager. You will need all your executables, transactions, and programs assigned to them. I mean, specifically your custom transactions. And then you can generate T-bombs from that structure. How can T-bombs be updated periodically? I think there are several options. Clyde has pointed out a few of them. You can create those T-bombs manually, for example. When you do your testing, you can integrate testing tools, and a relatively new feature Clyde has also outlined is the semi-dynamic creation of T-bombs, where that UPL information is taken as a basis. And UPL is basically a new logging file. You might note the STO3N log files, which capture transaction and program usage. UPL is another log file which captures additional information. Clyde, you can also jump in if you want in adding some comments here.
Okay.
SAP talks about test option 1 and test option 2. What are the advantages and disadvantages? Clyde, that's probably something for you.
Right. Again, I think to me the key is we can have the tools. I'm really going to, because I know we're running out of time, Heiko. So I really like to talk about. I talked a lot up front about the process. The process is really going to drive our organization. We need to have the right resources in the organization. We need to have a defined process that we get buy-in from our organization, our process teams, our test organization. The process is going to drive us. From a tools perspective, there are a lot of really slick tools out there that can help us. The tools that SAP obviously strongly recommends, and they use themselves, they do use Solution Manager, they do use the BPCA, they do use the HP tools to define and store their requirements and do their requirements linkage. They do use SAP TAO, and again, from a TAO perspective, TAO is a tool that I can leverage to create components. Components meaning, as an example, if I just use straight record playback type automation such as QTP, I may have 50 different places in my library of tests where I have the VA01 transaction, which is a create sales order. In the older technology, we would take that VA01 and I would have to find each of those 50 variants of the VA01 that were recorded using QTP, find them, fix them individually. With SAP TAO, because I now have a component that's stored in HP Quality Center that maybe call it create sales order, I now can pick that VA01 component up, fix it, parameterize it, save it. Now every place that was using that VA01 component, such as I used in the other example, the 50, are now all updated with the current usage of that particular transaction. So again, I think the thing that's important is that you really focus on the process and the methodology, and then find the tool set that's going to help you implement that methodology so that you can go faster, work. I guess it's work. I don't want to work harder. I want to work smarter. So I'll leave it at that. I know we're at the time. So any other questions for the team? Anybody online? Any more questions?
Yeah, here's one. For TSO to work, do we need to attach test cases to business process structure nodes in SAP Solution Manager?
Okay.
That's probably test scope optimization, TSO, right? And then yes, you would need to assign test cases.
And I think just real quick, just on the TSO as well, one of the things that the customer I'm with at right now they're doing, it comes down to I may have a project and I may have 50 test cases that I need to execute. With TSO, I'm able to prioritize those particular 50 test cases or scripts, as an example, from highest risk to the organization to lowest risk. So if we had 6 weeks initially to do the testing, and because the project's late, now we're down to 1 week, I don't have time to do testing for all of those different processes that are manual and automated and interfaces or whatever. With TSO, I now have the ability to prioritize, easily prioritize, based on risk, so that when we run out of time, we make sure that we're focused on the right things from a testing perspective and not testing that lower hanging fruit. That's kind of nice to test. Again, the tools are there to help enable our process. So I think that's it, Heiko, unless you got any more questions from the group.
One last question, and then we'll wrap it up. How do you run RB Plus periodically to update an existing business process structure? Yes, I mean that is possible. We can run RB Plus or SDA and RBVD, and then find the differences. And I think that's a very good question, because we need to keep that business blueprint up to date. New things might come into play. End users might stop doing things. As Clyde has indicated, there is also a possibility to use change request management, to track those changes. So we have a couple of options there as well. Good. You see that slide here. We will speak at the event next week. You have our contact information. We thank you very much for attending this webinar. As I said, the slides and the recording will be made available. Thanks for joining us today. Have a good day, and we'll hopefully we'll be in touch soon. Thanks.
Thank you.